The day of the funeral was wrapped in an unsettling silence, the kind that pressed against the chest and made breathing feel heavier. The fortune-teller's death had drawn together a strange mix of people: neighbors who had once come to her for advice in secret, skeptics who had called her a fraud, and curious onlookers who simply couldn't resist the pull of mystery. The small cemetery was thick with incense smoke, the scent clinging to every fold of clothing and every strand of hair. The wooden coffin rested at the front, draped in black cloth, its presence commanding both respect and unease. As the priest's voice droned in solemn prayers, a breeze stirred through the trees, setting the candles flickering, their fragile flames dancing like souls uncertain of staying or leaving. Then, as the words of blessing hung in the air, a crackling sound echoed from within the coffin, faint at first, like wood settling, then louder, sharper, more deliberate. Gasps rippled through the crowd as a sudden burst of fire shot upward, engulfing the coffin in furious flames. Panic spread instantly. People shrieked, stumbled back. Some ran toward the gates, while others froze where they stood. It was not the gentle fire of a fallen candle, nor the accidental spark of incense. It roared with unnatural ferocity, as though something inside the coffin had chosen that very moment to ignite itself. Shadows stretched across the mourners' faces, the firelight casting grotesque shapes upon their features, and in the midst of the chaos, a few swore they heard a voice rise with the flames, a deep, echoing murmur that seemed to ripple from the heart of the fire itself, whispering words no one could clearly catch but all felt in their bones. The sight was terrifying, mesmerizing, impossible to turn away from. And as the fire consumed what was meant to be her final resting place, a chilling thought took root in the hearts of all present, that perhaps the fortune-teller's death was not an end at all, but the beginning of something no one had been prepared to face. The fire raged with a will of its own, not spreading to the grass or the nearby mourners, but devouring only the coffin as though it had been chosen for this punishment, or this revelation. People clutched one another, their voices rising in prayers and curses alike, while some collapsed to their knees in disbelief. The priest dropped his book, his face pale, stammering that this was a sign from the devil, an omen of damnation. Yet amidst the chaos, one figure did not flee. A young woman, her dark hair pulled back, her trembling hands pressed against her chest, stepped closer instead of away. Her name was Eliza, though few in the crowd noticed her before. She had been the fortune-teller's shadow, an apprentice no one knew about, learning quietly while the old woman lived. To Eliza, this fire was not wholly unexpected. Only a week before her death, the fortune-teller had whispered through dry, cracking lips, "My funeral will not end me. When the fire takes me, the truth will be set free." The memory now struck Eliza with full force, the words pounding in her ears louder than the crackle of flames. As the fire reached its peak, something extraordinary revealed itself within the inferno. Among the collapsing planks of wood and blackened cloth, there was no charred body, no ash of bone, only a dark, metallic box that gleamed strangely untouched. The coffin crumbled to embers around it, but the box remained, humming faintly as though alive. Gasps turned to silence as eyes followed the glow, fear tangled with awe. Eliza's feet moved on their own, carrying her past the murmuring mourners, past the priest who reached out to stop her but found no words. She stepped into the dying heat of the blaze and reached for the object. To everyone's astonishment, the flames parted around her as if obeying an unseen command, not so much as singeing a thread of her dress. When her fingers touched the box, the fire hissed and collapsed into smoke, leaving only the smoldering earth and the girl clutching the strange artifact to her chest. A shudder passed through the crowd, for what had begun as a funeral now felt like a prophecy unfolding before their eyes, and the name of the fortune-teller was whispered like a warning in the wind. That night, Eliza sat alone in her small room, the black box resting on the wooden table before her. It was heavier than it looked, cold to the touch, and etched with strange markings she recognized from her teacher's hidden journals. She ran her fingers over the carvings, feeling their grooves pulse faintly, as if the box itself had a heartbeat. Outside, The town buzzed with restless talk. Some called her a witch. Others claimed she had tricked everyone with sorcery, while a few whispered that she had been chosen by forces older than they could understand. Eliza tried to shut their voices out, but every word reached her through the thin walls, wrapping her tighter in fear and responsibility. She remembered the fortune-teller's final moments, how the old woman had clutched her hand and whispered, "Do not be afraid when the fire calls. Inside you will find what they buried from the world. It will not harm you, but it will change you forever." Now those words echoed in her mind as she stared at the box. Gathering her courage, she pressed the latch, expecting resistance, yet the lock opened as though it had been waiting for her touch all along. Slowly, she lifted the lid. Inside lay stacks of aged parchment, the ink dark though the pages were yellowed with time. They were filled with prophecies, written in the fortune-teller's careful hand, visions of famine, wars, storms, and the fates of people in the town, some already fulfilled, others yet to come. Eliza's breath caught as her eyes landed on one parchment at the top, bearing today's date. It read, "On the day of my fire, a secret buried beneath your feet shall awaken, and the town will never see itself the same again." Her hands shook, the weight of destiny pressing down on her. What secret could be so immense that it needed fire, death, and prophecy to bring it forth? She looked again at the carvings on the box, at the symbols twisting in the candlelight, and felt the walls of her room shrink around her. Outside, the wind moaned through the trees, and beneath its cry, she thought she could hear a faint rumbling deep within the earth, as though something hidden had already begun to stir. By morning, the cemetery was no longer a place of quiet mourning, but the center of the town's fear and fascination. Word had spread through every street that the coffin had burned without cause, and that Eliza had walked through the flames untouched, carrying a relic no fire could consume. Groups of villagers gathered at the gates, some demanding answers, others praying, and many too afraid to step closer. The gravekeepers, shaken by the night's events, refused to work until the ground was blessed, but their shovels had already revealed something unusual. The soil near the fortune-teller's grave had collapsed, opening a gap that led into the earth. Officials were called, priests muttered protective chants, and finally a team descended with lanterns. What they discovered turned the whispers of witchcraft into roars of disbelief. Beneath the cemetery stretched a labyrinth of stone passages, long hidden, filled with relics that had lain untouched for generations. Ancient scrolls sealed in clay jars, faded murals depicting stars, fire, and shadowed figures, coins stamped with markings unknown to the living. In one chamber, they found bones laid neatly in rows, as though a secret order of people had been buried there, guardians of something forgotten. But the mural that silenced even the loudest skeptic was painted at the farthest end of the chamber. It showed a coffin bursting into flames before a gathered crowd, and in front of it, a woman stood, dark-haired, her hand reaching toward the fire without fear. The resemblance to Eliza was undeniable. Her likeness captured decades, perhaps centuries, before she had even been born. When the lantern light fell across the image, all eyes turned to her, some with reverence, others with dread. She felt their stares pressing against her back, accusing, expecting, demanding. The parchment she had read the night before returned to her mind, its words like a bell tolling in her ears. "A secret buried beneath your feet shall awaken." Now she understood, it was not just bones and relics the earth had given up. It was her place in a story written long before her birth, a prophecy painted in fire and stone, waiting for her to step into it whether she wished to or not. The days that followed were filled with unrest, the town splitting into two voices that grew louder with every hour. Some insisted Eliza was chosen, that the mural and the fire proved she was the heir to the fortune-teller's line, a protector sent to guard them from disasters foretold in the parchments. Others spat her name like venom, calling her a witch who had cursed the funeral and brought ruin upon them all. Windows slammed shut when she walked by, yet offerings of bread and candles appeared at her doorstep at night from those who believed in her. Inside her small home, the box of prophecies consumed her life. She pored over the parchments until her eyes ached, each word unraveling a web of secrets the town had never known. Some spoke of floods and harvests, others of deaths that matched the exact manner in which townsfolk had once passed. But one prophecy froze her blood more than any other. It was marked with a date only 3 days ahead. The storm will rise, fierce and unending, unless the heir of fire stands where the coffin burned to call it back. The words burned into her thoughts, impossible to ignore. Already the skies above the town were darkening too quickly, winds pulling at shutters, clouds swelling with unnatural weight. Eliza tried to warn the people, but half scoffed, half begged her to save them, their fear twisting into anger when she hesitated. Could she even do what the prophecy demanded? She had no spells, no chance beyond the fragments her teacher had taught her. Yet when she held the parchments, they seemed to whisper to her, shifting their words in the candlelight, as though urging her to speak them aloud. Each night the storm clouds gathered closer, thunder rumbling faintly in the distance like a beast drawing breath. By the third evening the whole town had gathered at the cemetery, whether out of faith or desperation. Lanterns bobbed in trembling hands, prayers mixed with curses, and all eyes turned to Eliza as she stood over the scorched earth where the coffin had burned. The black box felt heavy in her arms, heavier than her own body, but she knew this moment was the reason she had been led through fire. The storm was coming, and whether she was ready or not, every soul was waiting for her to decide if the prophecy would be fulfilled, or if the town would be swallowed by the sky. The wind howled through the cemetery like a living creature, tearing at cloaks and rattling lanterns as the storm unfurled above. The clouds were black and swollen, stitched with veins of lightning that lit the graves in fleeting, ghostly flashes. The townsfolk clung to one another, their eyes wide, fixed on Eliza as though her very breath might hold back the wrath of the heavens. She stood at the center, the charred earth beneath her feet, the black box clutched in her hands. Her heart pounded like a drum, every beat echoing the thunder overhead. For a moment, she felt like a child again, small and powerless, until she remembered her teacher's last words, that fire would not harm her, but would claim her as its heir. With trembling hands she opened the box, and the parchments within fluttered violently as though caught in an invisible wind. The writing shimmered in the stormlight, lines bending and reforming into a single incantation. Eliza lifted the pages high, her voice cracking as she began to speak the words, a language that seemed older than the earth beneath her feet. At first her voice was drowned by the roar of thunder, but as she continued, the storm faltered, listening. The air grew heavy, the lightning paused mid-sky, and the rain that had just begun to fall froze in suspended drops. Then the parchments caught fire, igniting with the same unnatural flame that had devoured the coffin, burning bright, but leaving her untouched. She let them go, and they rose like fiery birds into the clouds, vanishing in a blaze of light. The storm shuddered, then broke apart, the black clouds tearing open to reveal a sky suddenly calm and moonlit. Silence fell, thick and absolute, broken only by the soft sobs of those who realized they were still alive. Slowly, one by one, the townsfolk dropped to their knees, some weeping, some whispering prayers of gratitude, but all of them staring at Eliza with awe and fear mingled in their eyes. She stood among them, no longer the hidden apprentice, but the figure from the mural, the heir of fire who had turned prophecy into reality. Yet as the last sparks drifted from her fingertips, she understood what the fortune-teller had meant, that this was not an ending but a coronation. From that night onward, the town would never see her as ordinary again. She was no longer simply Eliza, she was the keeper of the flames, bound to the legacy that had burned its way into her soul, and every prophecy yet unread in the depths of that box was now her burden to carry into the future.